Welcome back, fellow time travelers. I'm your director of time travel, Mary Barbara Hanna. We are still wandering around the very early days of Parkersburg, or should I say Newport. So, just about 2 miles down the Ohio River from Newport, we have a fascinating story that takes place circa 1794 to 1806. So, frankly speaking, this place would our town would have been called Newport during the time of this adventure, and not Parkersburg, because as we discussed earlier, I think Parkersburg wasn't Parkersburg until about 1811. All right, so let's see what's next for Harman Blennerhassett. In our last episode, we explored the early life of Harman Blennerhassett, his birth, his education, and marriage to Margaret Agnew, his niece, that is, his sister's daughter. Harman and Margaret moved to the United States in about 1796, ready for a new start. They were guided by well-wishers to head west to the Ohio River Valley and discover all of its beauty and freedom. The Blennerhassetts bought a section of an island called Bacchus Island, and they built an enormous mansion at a time when most people lived in a one-room log cabins. Now, I say one-room log cabins because this is the frontier. This isn't the well-developed East Coast of the United States, right? This is all frontier land. So people are moving out here with literally the clothes on their backs, some household items, and starting from scratch. So most people only had the energy, uh, manpower to build, yeah, a one room cabin. All right. So tastefully appointed, filled with stunning furniture, rugs, lamps, and crystal, the Blennerhassetts were the ultimate hosts for lavish parties, picnics, and dances. So I think we talked a little bit about what their house looked like in our last episode, but here's another view of it, as it would have been back in its heyday, and we'll talk a little bit more about what it looks like now, when we get to the end of our story today. But again, just imagining, you're coming down the river and you see this monstrosity hanging out, as you sail by. I mean, your jaw would hit the floor. I mean, it probably would hit the floor now, even frankly. But anyway, so they, because of their wealth, because of their access, they are just the be all end all, and everybody wants to be close to these folks. So, because of that, unfortunately, due to their spending habits and the lending habits of Harman, the Blennerhassetts would eventually find themselves in a difficult financial situation. In the spring of 1805, the Blennerhassetts received a visit from the former vice president, Aaron Burr. Burr had served as vice president to Thomas Jefferson, seen here, from 1800 to 1804, and due to increasingly differing political views, Jefferson did not select Burr as his running mate for the 1804 election, and this left Burr feeling frustrated and angry at his removal from the political scene in Washington, D.C. His infamous duel with Alexander Hamilton was the final act of betrayal and sealed his eviction. It was about this time that the tales of Blennerhassett's fortune had reached Burr. And why would Burr be interested in Blennerhassett's fortune? Get this. Because Burr most likely had set his sights on the newly acquired Louisiana Purchase as possibly being used for his own empire, and was in need of investors for his plans. Now, I've read, both sides of the story here, and it's possible that he just thought he would move out that way and garner some land for himself. And this is also a time when, if other people can go take over land and declare it a country, he probably thought he could too. So, but the story goes, the legend is much more interesting if we say that he actually thought he could go west, take over territory, and run his own country, essentially. So he needs investors for that plan. So what did Burr need from Blennerhassett? First, he needed funding to purchase arms ammunition, and provisions, among other things, for an army of about 500 men. So here I found you a picture of what people were wearing in the army in the early 19th century. This would have been some of the gear that they needed. Second, Burr required 15 large riverboats to help move his men west. Now, as we look at that picture, you will remember from other videos where we've talked about these flatboats that would sail down the Ohio River. And because of the varying depths of the Ohio River at different times of year, they needed the flatboat. They had those long oars to help push the boat along. And then they would need all the things: horses, artillery, food, men, clothing, barrels of goods. I mean, just imagine you're trying to start a country. What do you need? So that's what they got going on there. Third, and most importantly, probably at this point, is Burr would need a base camp large enough in which to train his army. So the picture you're seeing of Blennerhassett Island, as we call it today, and their mansion, of course, this is the rebuild that was done in the 1900s, late 1900s. But just to give you an idea of the area of land available to Burr to Blennerhassett that he owned, and then to Burr, that men would have come out, started setting up their tents, started their militia training. And so, as we mentioned in the last episode, Blennerhassett had book smarts, but not really street smarts. And he saw this opportunity to grow his own coffers and begin, hopefully, a lucrative political career. He would move west, he would take his family, and he and Aaron Burr would start, I don't know what they thought, their own country, their own state, establish something. And that appealed to him. So Margaret also agreed with this. She thought this was a great opportunity for Harman to make his mark in the New World and use his knowledge and money to expand their own personal empire. So it may sound crazy today, excuse me, but back then, this was a happening thing. People were coming into the United States and making their mark and setting up their territories. And I guess my point is, it's not so out of the blue to think that they could do this, that they could pull this off. The Wild West was still really the Wild West. Native Americans, some lived out that way. The French had expanded, but then sold that land to the United States in the Louisiana Purchase. We have the Spanish taking, in the area of Mexico and California, those areas. So that land was, quote unquote, unclaimed by white people. And so they thought, hey, here's our chance to go make something for ourselves. Burr was only able to recruit about 100 men as rumors flew around the country about his plans. Now, when we say flew around the country, of course, it does not mean within seconds like we get our information today. It would have taken weeks for one person to tell another person to tell another person, and that person travel from Philadelphia to Pittsburgh, and somebody to take a boat down from Pittsburgh to Wheeling and meet somebody in Wheeling who would take a boat to Marietta, or ride horses down to Parkersburg or Newport or whatever you want to call it. But word would still travel quickly. And there's just not a lot of people. So telling one person and then 10 people know, well, there's only 10 people anyway. So everybody would know. So this is how word traveled, quote unquote, so quickly. And once the rumors start, people start looking at evidence. Like, did you hear what's going on out there at Blennerhassett Island? No, but I did notice a whole bunch of boats sailing by with a bunch of people on it. So that's how word starts to fly around the country. Someone, somewhere along the way, told Thomas Jefferson what they thought was going on. And Thomas Jefferson, who already is not a fan of Aaron Burr and knows Aaron Burr, probably recognized the real threat here. And he put out a proclamation or an order that requested, quote, all residents of the United States to bring to punishment all persons engaged in such treasonable enterprises as Burr's expedition, end quote. Edward Tiffin, governor of Ohio at that time sent the state's militia to the Ohio River to block all traffic. So we've seen a little bit of where those boats might have come across. We're getting that bird's eye view of Blennerhassett Island and thinking about where the troops might have come to block. They would have had boats to block the river so people couldn't get across. The United States government also sent the Virginia militia to seize Blennerhassett and his island. Now, Harman escaped to Kentucky. Word is coming down the river. People see what's happening. Everybody's talking, right? There isn't just one. There's gossip everywhere. So word is leaking out, getting downriver that something is happening. The government's on its way, the militia. So Harman gets out, takes the Ohio River down to the Mississippi and down into Kentucky. Margaret is able to get her kids and a few servants, and she goes across the river into Belpre, and then a few days later up into Marietta. So we know that Harman and Burr had escaped down the Ohio River to the Mississippi and into Kentucky. Eventually, Harman and Margaret and their children were together, but just for a short while. Harman is arrested and was taken to Richmond, Virginia, and he stands trial. Oh, he doesn't actually stand trial with Aaron Burr. Actually, what happens is Burr stands trial for high treason, but is acquitted as the trial failed to produce concrete evidence. Because, again, as I told you, lots of hearsay, lots of gossip. This could have been, as somebody phrased it, or Thomas Jefferson himself phrased it, an expedition. They're just going to see what they can see. They're taking men with them for protection. They're scouting land. There aren't any official documents drawing all these plans up. So they really can't prove once and for all that that was the purpose of what they were doing. So Blennerhassett is actually released without going to trial, but of course by this point his reputation is gone forever. His finances are ruined. He has no money left, and he is unable to go back to his island and return it to its former glory, because in the meantime the militia had actually raided his house, and sometime in about 1811 the house is burned to the ground, although that had nothing to do with the Burr incident. Nonetheless, the house is raided, destroyed. Everything is in ruins. So he and his family moved to Mississippi and they try their hand at cotton. So imagine how difficult this would be for a family that was living in the lap of luxury, surrounded by all beautiful things. And now they're living in a small home. They're trying to grow cotton, pick the cotton. They probably had some slaves because they're living in Mississippi. They weren't out picking cotton themselves, but they would not have had anything near the lifestyle they'd had previously. Unfortunately, the Blennerhassett's cotton venture in Mississippi fails, and the couple returns to Ireland. So unfortunately, Harman Blennerhassett dies penniless in 1831. Margaret returns to the United States, lives with her son in New York City, and she dies in 1842. And sometime in the far, 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 far future, she and her son are disinterred and their bodies moved back to Blennerhassett Island, where they are today. Now, the picture you see is the foundation that was discovered in 1973. The state of West Virginia undertook an 18-year restoration of the mansion, which took almost $1 million. The building was open to the public in 1991, and about 50,000 people visit this island Eden each year. As I said, the body of Margaret Blennerhassett and her son were exhumed about 1996 and returned to their home. Harman's body lies in an unknown, unmarked grave on the Isle of Guernsey on the English Channel. Thank you for time traveling with me and exploring the very unusual story of Harman and Margaret Blennerhassett. Our next time travel adventure bumps us forward quite a few years in the history of Parkersburg to about the 1850s. We are all familiar with the drilling for oil, but in fact, people came to Western Virginia to drill for a mineral. Can you guess what it was? I'll tell you next time. I'm Mary Barbara Hanna, Director of Time Travel for Parkersburg Tours. Reach out to us at parkersburgtours.com. Shoot us an email, parkersburgtours@gmail.com, or give us a call, 681-507-6188.